The Vethkai warship's silent dominion cut through the darkness of space like a blade through silk, its massive hull gleaming under the distant light of dying stars. And Commander Xyrith stood at the observation deck with her forearms folded behind her back as she watched her crew prepare for another routine raid. Her species had ruled this sector for 3,000 years, conquering world after world with their superior technology and their warrior discipline. And she had never once doubted that the Vethkai were the dominant force in the galaxy. "Commander," called her second officer from the tactical station, "we have detected a small vessel drifting near the outer nebula, and our scans indicate it is of human origin." Xyrith turned her head slowly, her compound eyes reflecting the blue glow of the control panels, and she felt a slight curl of amusement in her chest. Humans were such curious creatures, she thought, so small and soft and fragile, with their short lifespans and their lack of natural weapons. And yet they had somehow managed to spread across dozens of systems in recent centuries. "Is there anyone alive aboard?" she asked. "One life sign, Commander, a single human male." She made her decision without hesitation, ordering the raiding party to intercept the vessel and bring the survivor to her ship, thinking that perhaps this human could be sold to collectors or studied by their scientists back home. The boarding party returned within the hour, dragging a human male through the corridors of the Silent Dominion, while curious crew members stopped to stare at the strange creature in their midst. His name was Marcus Cole, and he was not what Xyrith had expected when they threw him at her feet on the command deck. He did not scream or beg or cry as so many other captured species had done before him, and instead he simply looked up at her with calm brown eyes and waited. "What were you doing in this sector, human?" Xyrith demanded, towering over him with her chitinous form casting a long shadow across the metal floor. "I am a xenobiologist," Marcus replied in a steady voice, "and I was conducting research surveys when my engine failed, leaving me stranded for 11 days before your ship found me." "You should thank us then," Xyrith said with a cold laugh, "for we have saved you from a slow death in the void. And what death do you have planned for me instead?" Marcus asked without fear. The question caught Xyrith off guard, and she studied this strange creature more carefully, noticing the way he observed everything around him with sharp attention, cataloging details and filing them away in his mind. "Take him to the prisoner hold," she commanded finally, "and we will decide his fate when we return to the homeworld." The guards grabbed Marcus roughly and hauled him away through the winding corridors of the ship, past dozens of Vethkai who sneered and clicked their mandibles at him in contempt. They threw him into a small cell with bare metal walls and a thin sleeping mat on the floor, and the doors sealed behind him with a heavy clang that echoed in the silence. But Marcus did not despair. He sat down cross-legged on the mat and began to listen, paying attention to every sound that reached his ears through the walls of his cell, learning the rhythms of the ship and the patterns of his captors. Within 3 days, he had memorized the guard rotation schedule, and within a week, he had begun to understand fragments of the Vethkai language just from listening to conversations outside his door. A young officer named Kale was assigned to bring him food and water twice daily, and Marcus used these brief interactions to practice his growing vocabulary. "You learn quickly," Kale observed one evening as Marcus thanked him for the meal using proper Vethkai grammar. "For a creature with such a small brain." "My brain may be small," Marcus replied with a slight smile, "but it is very efficient." Kale was different from the other Vethkai, younger and more curious, with a questioning nature that set him apart from his rigid warrior companions, and he found himself lingering at the cell door longer each day. "Why do you not despair?" Kale asked him one night, genuinely puzzled by the human's calm demeanor. "You are a prisoner with no hope of rescue, destined for slavery or death. And yet, you sit there as if you have no worries at all." Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "On my world, He began. There is an old saying that what does not kill you makes you stronger. And my species has survived countless disasters throughout our history by refusing to give up hope, even in the darkest moments. That seems foolish, Kale replied, though his voice carried more curiosity than mockery. Perhaps, Marcus agreed. But it has kept us alive for 200,000 years. The days passed slowly aboard the Silent Dominion, and Marcus continued his quiet observation of everything around him. Learning the ship's layout from the sounds he heard and the glimpses he caught when guards escorted him to the sanitation facilities, he learned that the Vethkai valued honor and strength above all else, that they despised weakness and pitied those they conquered, and that they had never once considered that a species they deemed inferior could ever be their equal. Commander Zareth visited his cell once, standing before the energy barrier with her arms crossed as she studied him like a scientist examining a specimen. You are a strange one, she admitted. For most prisoners break within the first few days, crying and begging for mercy. But you simply sit and watch and learn. I am making the best of my situation, Marcus replied calmly. And what do you hope to gain from that? Marcus looked up at her with those steady brown eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Time, he said simply, because time changes everything. And I have learned that patience is the greatest weapon any creature can possess. Zareth did not know how to respond to that, so she simply turned and walked away, leaving Marcus alone in his cell with nothing but his thoughts and his quiet determination. She did not realize it then, but the human prisoner in her hold would soon become the most important person on her entire ship, and the galaxy would never be the same again. 2 weeks had passed since the Silent Dominion captured Marcus Cole, and the great warship continued its long journey back to the Vethkai. Homeworld, through the endless darkness of space, Marcus had settled into a routine of sorts, spending his days learning the Vethkai language and culture through his conversations with Kale, who had become something like an unwilling teacher despite his initial reluctance. But everything changed on the 15th day when a strange sickness began to spread through the ship. It started in the engineering section, where 3 technicians collapsed at their stations with trembling limbs and clouded eyes. And within hours, their chitin had begun to crack and flake. Like old paint peeling from a wall, the ship's medical officers rushed to examine them, running every test in their database. But nothing they tried could identify the mysterious disease that was attacking their crew. What is happening to them? Commander Zareth demanded as she stood in the medical bay, watching her people suffer on their beds. We do not know, Commander, the chief medical officer replied with obvious fear in his voice. For this pathogen matches nothing in our records, and it spreads faster than anything we have ever encountered. By the end of the 3rd day, 40 crew members had fallen ill, and 5 had already died. Panic began to ripple through the ship like waves through water, and even the bravest warriors could not hide their terror as they watched their companions wither and fade before their eyes. Kale came to Marcus with the news, his usually calm face tight with worry as he stood outside the cell. There is a plague on the ship, he said quietly, and our doctors cannot stop it. Marcus stood up immediately, his mind already racing through possibilities and theories. What are the symptoms? He asked. Kale described everything he had seen and heard. The cracking chitin and the mental confusion and the rapid deterioration of healthy warriors into helpless invalids. And Marcus listened with intense concentration. I need to see them, Marcus said when Kale had finished, because I might be able to help. You? Kale let out a harsh laugh. What could a human possibly know about Vethkai biology? I am a xenobiologist, Marcus reminded him, and I have spent my entire career studying alien life forms across dozens of systems. So please take me to your commander and let me try. Kale hesitated for a long moment, torn between his duty and his desperation. But finally, he made his choice and went to speak with Commander Zareth Hour later, Marcus stood before the ship's council in the main conference chamber, surrounded by officers who looked at him with a mixture of contempt and reluctant hope. "You claim you can help us?" Xyrith asked coldly. "You, a soft little human with no claws and no armor and no strength?" "I claim I can try," Marcus replied evenly. "And at this point, what do you have to lose by letting me?" The council argued among themselves for several minutes, their clicking voices rising and falling in heated debate, until finally Xyrith raised her hand for silence. "Give him access to the medical bay," she commanded. "But watch him carefully, for if this is some trick, I will kill him myself." Marcus was escorted to the medical bay, where dozens of sick HFY lay on beds and mats, their once proud forms now twisted and weakened by the mysterious plague. He moved among them slowly, examining their symptoms with careful attention, asking questions through Kale, who served as his translator for the more complex medical terms. For 3 days Marcus barely slept, spending every hour in the laboratory, analyzing samples and studying the pathogen under powerful microscopes that showed him secrets invisible to the naked eye. On the 4th day, he finally found his answer. "This disease comes from Vareth Prime," he announced to Commander Xyrith and her officers. "The planet your fleet conquered 6 months ago." "Impossible," the chief medical officer protested. "We sterilized all materials from that world before bringing them aboard." "You sterilized for known threats," Marcus explained patiently. "But this organism was dormant, sleeping deep in the cellular structure of the plants you harvested for food supplies. And it only awakened when exposed to the specific temperature and humidity of your ship. Can you cure it?" Xyrith demanded, cutting through the technical explanations. "I believe so," Marcus said. "But I will need full access to your laboratory and your medicine stores, along with several crew members to help me prepare the treatment." Xyrith gave him everything he asked for, and Marcus worked around the clock with a team of HFY assistants, who followed his instructions with growing respect as they watched him move with purpose and confidence. He combined their advanced technology with human medical theories, creating a treatment that no HFY scientist would have ever imagined, because their rigid education system did not encourage the kind of creative thinking that came naturally to humans. On the 7th day since the outbreak began, Marcus administered his treatment to the first group of patients, and within hours, their symptoms began to improve. Chitons stopped cracking, minds began to clear, and warriors who had been on the edge of death sat up in their beds with wonder in their eyes. The cure worked. Over the following week, Marcus treated every infected crew member on the ship, moving from bed to bed with tireless dedication, while the medical staff watched in amazement. Commander Xyrith's own sister was among the sick, a young officer named Tyra, who had contracted the disease while caring for infected engineers. And Marcus saved her life with his treatment just hours before she would have died. When the last patient was cured and the plague was finally over, Marcus collapsed from exhaustion and slept for 18 hours straight. He woke to find Kale sitting beside his bed, watching over him with an expression that had changed completely from their first meeting. "You saved us," Kale said quietly. "And you did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Marcus replied. "Because helping others is what makes us human." Word of the healer human spread through every corridor and every deck of the Silent Dominion, and the crew who had once mocked Marcus now looked at him with something. Approaching Reverend Commander Xyrith summoned him to her quarters and stood before him in silence for a long moment before speaking. "I offer you a reward," she said finally, "for the service you have done for my ship and my people. So name what you want, and I will grant it if it is within my power." Marcus thought carefully before answering. "There are other prisoners in the hold," he said. "Beings from worlds you have conquered who suffer in darkness and chains. And I ask only that you give them better conditions." Zyrus stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. "You could ask for freedom," she said. "You could ask for wealth or comfort. And yet, you ask for nothing but mercy for strangers." "They're not strangers to me," Marcus said simply. "For they are prisoners just as I am, and their suffering matters just as much as mine." At that moment, something shifted in Commander Zyrith's heart. Though she did not yet understand what it meant, she granted his request, improving conditions for every prisoner on the ship. And she began to wonder if perhaps she had badly misjudged this strange little species called humanity. The Silent Dominion entered the Korath Passage 3 days after the plague ended, navigating through a dangerous corridor of space that was the fastest route to the Vethkai homeworld. This region was controlled by the Shrike Collective, a brutal race of parasitic creatures that fed on other species and attacked any ship foolish enough to enter their territory. Without proper tribute, Commander Zyrith had paid the tribute, sending a cargo of precious metals ahead to buy safe passage. But something had gone terribly wrong. "Commander," the sensor officer shouted with alarm in his voice, "we have 12 Shrike vessels emerging from the asteroid field, and they are moving to intercept." Zyrith rushed to the tactical display and felt her blood run cold as she watched the enemy ships surround her vessel like predators circling wounded prey. "They took our tribute and betrayed us," she growled. "So all hands to battle stations and prepare to fight." The first wave of attacks hit the Silent Dominion with devastating force. Energy weapons tearing through the outer hull, while boarding pods slammed into the ship's sides and released swarms of Shrike warriors into the corridors. The Shrikes were nightmarish creatures, tall and thin with elongated limbs and mouths filled with needle-sharp teeth, and they moved with terrible speed as they slaughtered everyone in their path. Vethkai warriors fought back with courage and skill, but the crew was still weakened from the plague, and the Shrikes seemed endless as more and more of them poured through breaches in the hull in the chaos of battle. Kale ran to the prisoner hold and found Marcus standing at his cell door, listening to the sounds of combat echoing through the ship. "We are under attack," Kale said as he deactivated the energy barrier. "And you need to hide before the Shrikes find you." "Hide?" Marcus stepped out of his cell and looked at Kale with determination burning in his eyes. "I am not going to hide while people who saved my life are dying." "You are no warrior," Kale protested, "and you have no weapons and no armor. So what can you possibly do against the Shrikes?" "I can think," Marcus replied, "and sometimes that is worth more than any weapon." He grabbed Kale's arm and pulled him down the corridor toward the medical bay, explaining his plan as they ran. "The Shrikes are biological creatures," Marcus said rapidly, "and every biological creature has weaknesses that can be exploited. So I need access to your chemical stores and 10 minutes to prepare." "Prepare what?" Kale demanded, a surprise. They reached the medical bay just as a group of 5 Shrikes burst through a nearby doorway, their claws dripping with blue Vethkai blood and their terrible mouths open wide in hungry anticipation. Kale raised his weapon and fired, taking down 2 of them before the others could reach him. But the remaining 3 were fast and vicious, and nearly overwhelmed him. Marcus grabbed a container of medical solvent from a nearby shelf and threw it at the closest Shrike, splashing the liquid directly into its face. The creature screamed and staggered backward, clawing at its eyes as the solvent burned through its sensitive membranes. And Kale used the distraction to finish it off with a blast to the chest. "How? Did you know that would work?" Kale asked in amazement. "I read about Shrike biology in your database," Marcus explained quickly, "and their sensory organs are extremely vulnerable to certain chemical compounds. So help me make more of this." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus worked frantically in the medical bay while Kale guarded the door, mixing chemicals and filling containers with improvised weapons that no Vethkai scientist would have ever thought to create. "Take these to your warriors," Marcus instructed as he handed Kale a case filled with chemical grenades, and tell them to aim for the face and the joints where the Shrike armor is weakest. Kale ran off to distribute the weapons while Marcus continued working, creating more compounds and thinking about other ways to fight back against the invaders. When he had made all the weapons he could, Marcus grabbed a bag filled with chemical containers and headed into the battle himself, moving through corridors filled with smoke and blood and the sounds of combat. He found a group of HFY soldiers pinned down by a large force of Shrikes in the main cargo bay, their ammunition running low and their hope fading fast. "Human," one of the soldiers shouted when she saw him. "Get out of here before they kill you." Instead of running, Marcus pulled a chemical grenade from his bag and hurled it into the center of the Shrike formation. The container burst on impact, releasing a cloud of gas that sent the Shrikes into convulsions as their nervous systems overloaded from the chemical assault. "Attack now," Marcus shouted, and the HFY soldiers surged forward to finish off their disoriented enemies. Word spread quickly through the ship about the human, who's turning the tide of battle with his strange weapons and his clever tactics. And more soldiers sought him out for his chemical grenades and his advice on how to exploit Shrike weaknesses. Marcus moved from fight to fight, sometimes throwing his weapons and sometimes shouting instructions to struggling defenders, always thinking 3 steps ahead and finding solutions that no one else could see. He did not fight like a warrior because he was not a warrior, but he fought like something else entirely, like a creature that had evolved on a world where survival meant outsmarting dangers that could not be defeated through strength alone. Commander Zereth found him in the engineering section, directing a counterattack against a Shrike force that had been trying to sabotage the ship's engines. She watched in stunned silence as this small, soft, fragile human coordinated her soldiers with calm efficiency, pointing out weak points and suggesting tactics that her own officers had never considered. When the last Shrike in the section fell, Marcus turned to face her with exhaustion written across his face and burns on his arms from near misses with enemy weapons. "The boarding parties are weakening," he reported, "and if we push hard now, we can drive them back to their pods and seal the breaches before reinforcements arrive." Zereth gave the order, and her warriors swept through the ship with renewed determination, using Marcus's chemical weapons and tactics to devastating effect within the hour. The last Shrike had been killed or driven off, and the enemy fleet retreated into the asteroid field, unwilling to lose more soldiers against a ship that had proven far more dangerous than expected. The Silent Dominion had survived, barely, with nearly a third of its crew dead or wounded and massive damage to its hull and systems. But it had survived. Marcus collapsed against a wall, his body finally giving out after hours of non-stop action, and he looked up to find Kale and Commander Zereth standing over him. "You stayed," Zereth said quietly. "When you could have hidden or escaped in the chaos, you stayed and fought beside us." "Of course I did," Marcus replied with a tired smile. "Because you are my shipmates now, and humans do not abandon their shipmates." Zereth knelt down until her eyes were level with his, and for the first time since they had met, she looked at him not as a prisoner or a curiosity, but as an equal. "I offer you your freedom," she said solemnly, "for you have earned it 10 times over." Marcus was quiet for a moment before shaking his head slowly. "If it is all the same to you," he said, "I would like to stay and see this journey through to the end." Zereth did not understand why a prisoner would choose to remain when offered freedom, but she accepted his decision with a nod of respect, and somewhere deep in her warrior's heart, she began to realize that perhaps the HFY had been wrong about humans all along. The Silent Dominion limped into orbit around Thyros Prime, with smoke still trailing from its damaged hull, and scars of battle marking every surface. Below lay the HFY homeworld, a massive planet of red deserts and towering cities that had been the heart of a great empire for over 3,000 years. Marcus stood at the observation window with Kale beside him, watching the planet grow larger as the ship descended toward the capital city. "What will happen to me now?" Marcus asked quietly. "The High Council wishes to meet you," Kale replied with something that sounded almost like nervousness. "The word of what you did has reached them, and they want to understand how a single human could accomplish what you accomplished." "That sounds like it could go very well or very badly," Marcus observed. "Yes," Kale agreed. "It could." They landed at the central spaceport and were immediately surrounded by hundreds of curious Vethkai who had gathered to see the famous human they had heard so much about. Marcus walked through the crowd with his head held high, neither cowering nor boasting, simply moving forward with the quiet dignity that had become his trademark. Commander Zyrith escorted him personally to the Grand Chamber where the High Council waited. A vast hall of polished stone and ancient banners where the most powerful leaders of the Vethkai Empire sat in judgment. 12 council members looked down at Marcus from their elevated seats, their compound eyes glittering with suspicion and curiosity and a dozen other emotions he could not quite read. The High Arbiter, an ancient Vethkai named Korax with silver streaks across his chitin, raised one hand for silence. Marcus Cole of Earth, his voice echoed through the chamber. "You stand before the High Council of the Vethkai Empire, and we have questions that demand answers. I will answer what I can," Marcus replied calmly. "You were taken as a prisoner," Korax continued, "weak and alone and helpless. Yet within weeks you had saved an entire warship from plague and from enemy attack. So we ask you plainly, how is this possible?" Marcus took a deep breath and looked around at the assembled leaders before speaking. "The Vethkai have always believed that strength comes from armor and claws and weapons," he began. "From hard shells and sharp edges and the power to destroy your enemies through force." He paused, gathering his thoughts into words they would understand. "But humans come from a different world, a world called Earth. And Earth is not a kind or gentle place. We have studied your planet." One of the council members interrupted with contempt in her voice. "And it seems quite ordinary compared to many worlds." "With respect," Marcus replied, "you studied the surface and missed the truth beneath." He took a step forward, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "Earth is a death world," he declared. "A planet that has tried to kill my species since the moment we first drew breath." The council stirred with surprise at his words. "Our world has monsters that can swallow us whole and poisons that can kill us with a single touch." Marcus continued, "It has temperatures that can freeze us solid or cook us alive. Earthquakes that level cities and storms that tear across continents and diseases that have wiped out millions of us throughout our history." "If that is true," Korax said slowly, "then how did your species survive?" "We survived because we learned that strength is not about armor or claws," Marcus answered. "And it is not about being the biggest or the fastest or the most deadly." He met the eyes of every council member as he spoke his next words. "Strength is about adaptation, about looking at a problem that should destroy you and finding a way to survive anyway, about working together with others even when trust is difficult, about refusing to give up even when every logical calculation says you should." The chamber had fallen completely silent. "You see my soft skin and think I am weak," Marcus said. "But my skin allows me to shed heat efficiently on a planet where overheating could kill me. And you see my lack of claws and think I am harmless. But my hands can build tools that accomplish what claws never could." He held up his hands, those strange five-fingered appendages that had seemed so bizarre to the Vethkai. "These hands have built spaceships and cured diseases and created art that makes people weep with joy," he continued. "And they have done these things because humans learned long ago that our greatest weapon is not our body but our mind." Councillor Varric, an elderly philosopher who had remained silent until now, leaned forward with interest gleaming in his ancient eyes. You speak of cooperation, Varric said thoughtfully. And yet you helped those who captured you, those who would have sold you into slavery. So why? Because holding on to hatred would have helped no one, Marcus replied. And because showing kindness to enemies is sometimes the fastest way to turn them into friends. He gestured toward Commander Xerath, who stood at the edge of the chamber. Your commander took me as a prisoner, and I could have resented her for that, but instead, I chose to help when help was needed. And now I stand here, not as a captive, but as someone who has earned respect through actions rather than demanding it through threats. The council erupted into debate, voices rising and falling as different factions argued about what Marcus's words meant for the future of the Empire. Some saw humans as a dangerous threat that should be eliminated before they could become powerful enemies. Others saw them as potential allies whose unique abilities could strengthen the Empire beyond measure. But it was old Varric who silenced them all with a single question. If one human, alone and unarmed, could save an entire warship, he said slowly, then what could humanity accomplish if they were fighting beside us as friends instead of serving beneath us as slaves? The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Marcus stood quietly while the council debated his fate and the fate of relations between their species. And he wondered if this moment might be the beginning of something greater than he had ever imagined. Finally, High Arbiter Corax raised his hand for silence. We have heard your words, Marcus Cole, he announced. And we have much to consider before making any decisions about humanity. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight it had not held before. But know this, you came to us as a prisoner, and you will leave this chamber as a guest. For you have shown us that perhaps the Vethkai still have things to learn about the nature of strength. Marcus bowed his head in acknowledgement, and as he turned to leave, he caught Kale's eye across the chamber. His young friend was smiling, a genuine smile that spoke of hope for what might come next, and Marcus smiled back, because he knew that sometimes the greatest victories are not won through battle, but through understanding. And today understanding had taken its first small step towards something that could change the galaxy forever. 1 year had passed since Marcus Cole stood before the High Council of the Vethkai Empire. And in that time, everything had changed. The space station called Unity Point hung in the void between two star systems. A massive structure of gleaming metal and glowing lights that represented something that had never existed before in this corner of the galaxy. It was the first joint station built by humans and Vethkai working together, a symbol of cooperation between two species who had once seemed destined to be enemies. Marcus stood on the main observation deck, watching ships from both civilizations dock side by side at the station's ports. Human vessels painted in blues and whites alongside Vethkai warships in their traditional black and crimson. He was no longer the thin, exhausted prisoner who had been dragged aboard the Silent Dominion all those months ago, but a man who carried himself with quiet confidence and purpose. The door behind him opened, and he smiled without turning around as familiar footsteps approached. You always stand here watching the ships, Kale said as he came to stand beside his friend. And I have never understood what you find so fascinating about it. I find hope, Marcus replied. Because every ship that docks here represents another connection between our peoples. Another thread in a tapestry that grows stronger every day. Kale made a sound that might have been agreement, though his Vethkai face was as difficult to read as ever for most humans. But Marcus had learned to see the subtle shifts in his friend's expression. The slight movements of mandibles and the changes in posture that revealed emotions hidden beneath that hard chitinous exterior. They had come so far together, from prisoner and guard to partners and friends, and their relationship had become a model for what cooperation between their species could achieve. The Earth delegation arrives tomorrow, Kale reminded him, and there is still much preparation to complete before the signing ceremony. I know, Marcus said with a slight sigh. But sometimes I need a moment to just appreciate how far we have come. He remembered those first difficult months after his speech to the High Council, when the Vethkai had sent messages to Earth requesting diplomatic contact, and the human governments had responded with fear and suspicion. Why would an empire that is conquered dozens of worlds want peace with us? They had demanded, certain that it must be some kind of trap. Marcus had worked tirelessly to bridge that gap, sending reports back to Earth about his experiences and begging his government to give the Vethkai a chance. Commander Zyrith had helped too, now promoted to Admiral in recognition of her actions during the Plague and the Shrike attack. And she had used her influence to push for genuine partnership rather than the conditional submission the hardliners on both sides wanted. Slowly, painfully, trust had begun to build. Human scientists visited Vethkai worlds to share medical knowledge, and Vethkai engineers taught humans about technologies that had seemed like magic. Just a few years ago, trade routes opened between their territories, bringing prosperity and connection where there had once been only distance and mutual ignorance. And Marcus had been at the center of it all, not because he sought power or glory, but because he understood both sides in a way that no one else could. The door opened again, and this time Admiral Zyrith herself entered the observation deck, her forearms folded behind her back in her characteristic pose of authority. "Ambassador Cole," she said formally, though Marcus could see the warmth in her compound eyes. "The final documents are ready for your review." "Thank you, Admiral," he replied with equal formality, though they both knew that the titles were mostly for show. When they were among friends, Zyrith moved to stand at the window beside them, looking out at the station she had helped create. "I have been thinking about the day we captured your ship," she said quietly, "about how I looked at you and saw nothing but a weak creature to be pitied or sold. We all make mistakes in judgment." Marcus offered. "This was more than a mistake." Zyrith shook her head slowly. "For my entire species had convinced ourselves that we understood strength, and we were wrong." She turned to face Marcus directly. "You taught us that true strength is not about armor or weapons or the power to destroy," she continued, "but about the courage to help others even when they have done nothing to deserve it, and about the wisdom to see potential friends in those we once considered enemies." Marcus felt emotion rising in his chest, but kept his expression calm. "I only showed you what humanity has learned through thousands of years of struggle," he said, "and your people had the wisdom to listen. Tomorrow we sign the Alliance Charter," Zyrith said, "and our species will be bound together in friendship for generations to come. But I want you to know that for me, personally, that friendship began in the corridors of my ship. When you chose to save my people from a plague you had no obligation to cure." She placed one clawed hand on his shoulder, a gesture of deep respect among the Vethkai. "You became our salvation, Marcus Cole, and I will never forget that." The ceremony the next day was everything Marcus could have hoped for. Representatives from 12 human nations stood beside delegates from every major clan of the Vethkai Empire, gathered in the Great Hall of Unity Point to witness the signing of an agreement that would change history. Marcus spoke to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying through translation devices to every listener in attendance. 14 months ago, I was a prisoner in a cell, alone and afraid and certain that my life was over, he began. But I learned something important during that time. He looked out at the faces watching him, human and Vethkai together, and felt his heart swell with hope. I learned that the universe is not a cold and hostile place where only the strong survive, he continued, but a vast and wonderful mystery where cooperation and compassion can achieve things that force and fear never could. He paused to let his words settle in the minds of his listeners. "Today, we take the first step on a new journey together. human and Vethkai walking side by side into a future that neither of us could have imagined alone. We will face challenges along the way, and there will be those on both sides who doubt the wisdom of this alliance. But I believe with all my heart that if we face those challenges together, there is nothing we cannot overcome. The crowd erupted in applause as the documents were signed, and Marcus watched with tears in his eyes as leaders from both species embraced and shook hands and promised to build a better future for all their children. Later that evening, after the celebrations had quieted and most of the delegates had retired to their quarters, Marcus returned to the observation deck one last time. Cale found him there, as he always did, staring out at the stars with a peaceful expression on his face. "What are you thinking about?" Cale asked. "I am thinking about how strange fate can be," Marcus replied. "Because 1 year ago I was dying alone in a broken ship. Certain that my story was over." He turned to smile at his friend, but instead my story was just beginning. And I found a family I never expected among people who were supposed to be my enemies. Cale stood beside him in comfortable silence for a long moment before speaking again. "The galaxy is vast," he said, "and there are countless species out there who have not yet learned what the Vethkai have learned about humanity." "Then I suppose we have work to do," Marcus said with a grin. "Yes," Cale agreed. "We do," and together they stood watching the stars. Two friends from different worlds, united by something stronger than blood or species, ready to face whatever the future might bring, because they had learned the most important lesson the universe had to teach, that true strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the courage to understand and the wisdom to turn enemies into friends. And that lesson, once learned, could change everything.